Talk, 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 talk. Art of the Zodiac presents Talk, Talk, Talk. When people ask how I got into astrology, the story I want to tell them is that I'm 12 years old, visiting my great aunt Seraphine in the woods. It's a dark and stormy night after dinner during tea when she excuses herself to go into the attic and comes down with this giant dusty tome on astrology, this massive book with yellowed pages, and puts it in front of me. At that moment, thunder and lightning. She proceeds to share all sorts of family secrets and truths about myself that would later reveal themselves in time. That would be a great story. The truth is, I got into astrology at complete rock bottom. I was well into adulthood and failing in my career and failing even harder in my love life. And when I say like failing, this isn't cute. This isn't the sort of romantic, I was a bohemian and went too far, maybe picked up an addiction and through the magic trio of CrossFit 12-step programs and astrology willed myself back into purpose. No, I was just a really boring mess, obsessed with two things, dating and astrology. Particularly love astrology. I was voraciously reading articles in Vogue and Cosmo, trying to find answers like, why would Aries men always break my heart? Or would things be different if I started dating Cancers versus Capricorns? Of course, I never got the answers I was searching for because I lacked complete self-awareness and desperately needed therapy. And astrology, as I later learned, can't fix us. And of course, we are all greater than our sun signs. Okay. That journey did, however, lead me to astrological study, for which I am forever grateful. Okay, where am I going with all this? You're about to listen to the conversation I wish I had when my entire life was falling apart, although I was such a mess, I probably wouldn't have listened to it. But here you are, and lucky for you. My guest, it has taken this long for the big reveal, is the legendary astrologer Samuel F Reynolds. Sam is truly one of my astro heroes. And in the following conversation, he breaks down astrology and relationships, how to understand them and nurture them. And he even opens up about his personal love life. Now, I realize that's not a big Sam bio. If you want to learn more about Sam, check out my Substack article, link in notes. I list a complete bio for Sam along with a bonus interview. So bookmark that. Now, the following conversation is a teaser to Sam's upcoming lecture and workshop at LA Astro Fest happening in Los Angeles over the weekend of April 25th through 27th. While this is primarily an in-person event, hello LA friends, his workshop, How to Win Friends and Influence People Using Astrology, will be available to stream live from anywhere in the world. Visit laastrofest.com to get your tickets. And now, on with the talk. Okay, so yeah, we're gonna hop right into it, Sam. Tell me about how you met or your girlfriend or what you're.
You don't want to introduce me, like what I'm doing? You just want to go into. I mean, like, what? Aren't you an Aries? You know, like, oh, like, right?
I'm like, ooh, okay. Sam Reynolds, astrologer. Ooh. I'm gonna give you an intro. Like, I'm gonna record you a better intro.
Okay, you are? Okay, that's fine. I don't really care. I just was like, yo, you just went straight. And you are Sun in Aries, right? Is that what I remember?
Am.
Yeah,
I am Sun in Aries. Yeah, I know.
Go straight for it.
Well, we were talking and I got really excited. And you're like, well, record this story. And I was like, sure.
We can record. So yeah, you might want to bring them up to speed. So what are we talking about?
Okay, so we were talking, well, first I will say, I'm really excited because you're coming to Los Angeles at the end of April for the LA Astro Fest. So, and you are giving both a lecture and a workshop, and both of them, I think, to some degree, have to do with compatibility, right? Compatibility, like business-wise, relationship. And so, you know, we're here today to talk a little bit about that, a little bit about just your background. But you know, you started telling the story about your new love, and what better way to enter the podcast about compatibility than to get this juicy story from you.
Okay, so it's public, so I don't mind sharing the story, and I don't think she minds either.
Yes.
I am with an astrologer. Her name is Jessica Irene. She goes by Dendra Lethia on the social media, both Twitter, Instagram. And I was beginning to tell the story, you know, because you asked, well, how did we meet? And that's a normal, natural question. And it's always interesting because how we met is more so through Twitter, Astro Twitter specifically.
Okay.
But I would say how we encountered each other. And how I got to encounter her, since we both know him, is through Gabe. Gabe encouraged Jessica to get on Twitter when NCGR had its conference either in 2018 or 2019.
Okay.
And then she got on there. Now, from the moment she got on, I was interested in her content. And so I would follow her, but she wouldn't follow back, which annoyed me as a senior astrologer. I'm just putting my ego out there. And so I would unfollow her. That's petty, Sam. Fuck, yeah, it is. And so I did. But then I would see something I like and then follow her. And then like no follow back, nothing. And I was just like, okay. Well, I don't think I unfollowed her the next time. Maybe I did. I don't remember. But I met her at NORWAC.
Okay.
In 22 or 23. I can't remember. Those years blend. I think I saw her in 22 and then I met her. And I went up to her and Vivi was like stepping into an ice box. She was like the ice queen, you know. And I was like, hi, I'm Sam Reynolds. She's like, I know who you are. And I was just like, okay. Hi, yeah, basically I check in with everybody, as you might remember at NORWAC, right? Mm-hmm. And she just wasn't really having this. I was like, oh, you know, so I went to Gabe. I was like, yo, what's up with her? Oh, she's just like that sometimes, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, sure. Whatever, Gabe. And just left it alone. Cut to the next year, make a long story much shorter. She did follow me after I took an astrologer who I felt was bullying people online to task.
Okay.
And so I wrote her. I was like, oh, I really appreciate the follow. I was under the impression that you didn't like me. She wrote back, oh, I didn't like you.
I love this story so much. Please go on.
And I was like, okay, may I ask why? Yeah. And one reason she gave, she's a Virgo sun.
Okay.
One reason she gave, I think, was very valid. And one other reason she gave, I thought, oh, we just are going to disagree. And I understand, even that is valid reasoning. I just don't share it. So one reason she gave was like, well, essentially because you call Aquarians winter Virgos, and I think it muddies the water, you know, because she's a Virgo sun. And I was like, okay, I'm going to keep calling them winter Virgos, but I understand how you see it that way. And then the other one, she's like, well, you drag people a certain way, and I don't think that's responsible as a teacher. And I thought that was valid. I was like, oh, I can see how that can come off. And I thought that was good corrective. But what that demonstrated to me was, one, she's not a sycophant. And two, I can trust her. She's a very honest person. Yeah. And I still think that about her. That she was very honest and straightforward. I tell her that all the time. And she, you know, Virgo. Yeah. But then, you know, we just casually would talk, but nothing serious. And then in terms of the love story starting, when the moon was in Pisces in August 21st, is a date where she started talking about wanting some cognac, cheese, something, salmon. And she was talking about it. And I was like, this is really random. And so I was like, do you want someone to make it or you buy it? What is that? And she's like, well, you could buy it. But yeah, I was just talking about it. So I DM'd her, which I rarely do to women for obvious reasons, right? Okay. I DM'd her and said, you know, will do you mind if I buy it for you? Basically kind of like, you know, hey. And she didn't. She gave me her address, and this company sent it to her within 12 hours. I mean, it was fish, so it was like very impressive that she got it. I ordered it that afternoon, and she got it before the morning or 9 a.m. or something like that in East time. And then we just started talking, and she really wasn't, giving me much what we say mid-range initially. She talked with me and she was courteous, but she didn't even ask really, how are you? She just was kind of like, well, and she gave me her own reasons for that.
Yeah.
She just basically was kind of feeling me out. And then I just was persistent because I was like, and you might wonder, well, what's the astrology of it? Without going too much, about her chart, because it's semi-public, but my Mars is on her ascendant. Her Venus is directly to the exact degree on my descendant.
Oh.
So that's very powerful. We have conjoining lots of fortune. We also are similar temperaments. We also are similar, even with the Myers-Briggs. We're both INTJs.
Okay.
So there, we could go deeper into the compatibility, but she shared her chart, and then I looked at it. I was like, oh yeah, I'm going for you. And I didn't relent. And I'm not saying I wore her down, because she also, we want the same things. She wanted the same things, and and I guess we've fallen in love.
Okay, I love this so much. Question, going back into this, you were saying you were talking with her, but then you said you DM'd her. Were you just like publicly chatting on Twitter? Was that what most of this was until you DM'd her?
When she followed me, I DM'd her, and then that's when she said, I didn't like you. And we talked a little bit.
Okay.
We engaged each other a little bit in public. Okay. And the DMs were very sporadic because she didn't follow me until like April of 24. And then I hit her up in August. But between that time, we didn't DM much at all. Because I thought she was beautiful. I still think she's beautiful, but I didn't, you know what I mean? I just didn't feel the moment like that. And also I'm very careful. Mm-hmm. One of the things is talking about ethics. Like, I don't hit on people who've been students. I don't hit on people who've been clients. So that those are off the table. And even for people to know, you're not even supposed to hit on anyone. A speaker is not supposed to hit on anyone at NORWAC. We sign paperwork related to that.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah. So, that's another thing too. So there are protections in place. You may say, well, wasn't she at NORWAC? I didn't hit on her at NORWAC.
Yeah. What do you think, coming into the astrology of it, right? Like, what do you think was turned on in your chart that made you so like, I'm going after this person?
I knew I was heading toward, this is getting a little complicated for maybe some, those who may not be familiar with certain predictive techniques.
Okay.
I knew I was in a certain Venus period related to something called Fidaria.
Okay.
I knew I was heading toward what we call 10th house perfection. And the ruler of my 10th house is in the 7th. The last time that happened, I met my wife, or I was with my wife. So I knew that I was going toward a circle of relationship, and I wasn't finding that really authentically here in Santa Fe, or in the surrounding area. So, and then also, I also always found Jessica alluring. I tried to connect with her. It wasn't initially romantic, but like, oh, she's interesting. What is she about? Blah, blah, blah. So I think we've also looked at the astrology of the moment. I think, I'm trying to remember, but there were some things happening, on the 21st of August that boded well for us. And then, as I mentioned, I'm a Pisces rising. The moon was in Pisces. She also knew that she was going, part of the Mars story, because she, there's a particular angle in her chart that relates to Mars, or Cancer, I should say. Okay. She knew some measure of the Mars story, and the Mars retrograde story might entail relationship. As she puts it, Mars always brings her men. So I think, even though her focus was different, she was trying to, do something else.
Yeah.
But she's trying to, she knew that there was this moment possible.
I love that. And her sun is in your 7th house, your Pisces rising.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Bringing it back I think there's a thread here. Oh, bless you. There's a thread here. So for those who don't, now you get your introduction, right? Sam Reynolds, astrologer. You, I should want to say, at the last Astro Salon, it's gonna make sense. Do you know Lars Mellis, the astrologer?
I do.
Yeah, Lars is wonderful. And I asked Lars, right, like his route to astrology, and he referenced you. He's like, similar to the great, he did sing your praises, Sam Reynolds. I was a skeptic, and that's how I came to astrology. And that's how you came to astrology, which feels there's something in here about you, like, I don't know, there's something that compels you perhaps to the things you don't know or wanting to figure out things. But maybe that's a good pivot to tell people like about how you came to astrology before we get into more astrology.
Well, yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I'll start with the pivot related to relationship and then, like my own journey with it.
Yeah.
So I mentioned I'm a Pisces rising, but my Jupiter's in Virgo. And why that's important, yes, it does relate to Jessica in that sense. My Jupiter does connect to her Venus. But even more important, it was really like if I think she had started off fawning, for me or liking me, I probably would have been like, no. And you're like, why is it? I think she kind of hooked into my Jupiter was like, oh, I like this one. She didn't even like you at first. Right. And so there's something to her. Right. And so I think, one of the things I learned early is I have to pay attention to the things now, even though this was a different issue with Jessica, I have to pay attention to things that have either antipathy to me or I have antipathy to it. So astrology was one of those things. Folks who were queer was one of those things, right? You're like, oh, were you homophobic? Yes, I was homophobic because I was a preacher.
Wow. Okay.
At one particular point, right? So now a good measure of my community are queer, right? So it's kind of more, and I don't identify that way, but I don't have to. It's just it doesn't matter in that sense for me. So that's one example, and then astrology is the other story, because I always had, previous to becoming or going into astrology, I always had a certain kind of antipathy toward astrology, partly because I'm on the quote unquote cusp between Scorpio and Sagittarius. So November 22nd. And why that was a challenge for me was because when I would read about, Scorpio, it would say one set of things. And then when I read about Sagittarius, and it would resonate, some of it.
Yeah.
When I would read about Sagittarius, then that also would resonate maybe even a little more. And then just in terms of the symbolism, if I had to choose between the Arachnid and the Centaur, I would probably prefer to be the Centaur, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't be like, yeah, I got a bow and arrow, right? I have weapons. You just got a little stinger. Ha ha. So I was talking about this, now over 30 years ago, to a woman I had a crush on, who was an older woman, who had the sense enough to befriend me, but not, lead me on or, whatever. I was in graduate school and I was just full of myself. I was like 24, 23 really. And just kind of like, oh, I could nab anybody, like whatever. And she was really into astrology, and she's like, no, I think you're the bug. And I'm like, no, I don't think
you're the bug.
I don't think that's right. And she was a Gemini, so it's kind of another Mercury-based person. Anyway, I stumbled upon an astrologer, literally, because I was looking for something else. And he's like, have you had your chart done? No. Well, I can do your chart for you, for X amount of dollars. And I was flush with a little cash. And so I went and got a reading. And Vivi, for the first 15 minutes, I thought it was just bunk, what I thought astrology was, because he was saying things, you've met me in person.
Yeah.
And so he was like, oh, it seems like there's something that happened in utero. Like, I'm really short for a man. Statistically, something did happen.
Yeah.
Bravo. I didn't say any of this. I was actually expressionless as he was saying it on purpose, because I didn't want to give him anything, proving I was a Scorpio, really. but I didn't know that. But I was kind of like, mm-hmm. And he said, and I told him I was in graduate school. And he's like, oh, it seems like you're a pretty smart guy, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I told you I was in graduate school for PhD. Chances are I'm not an idiot. But again, not saying anything. Then it happened. Then he started talking about my family dynamics, specifically between like my mother, father, brother, which complicated my pregnancy. And I had only learned that 2 months before. So that's when I broke my facade and was like, how do you know that? Oh, it's right here. You look, and I was like, that didn't make any sense. So that's partly what set me flowing. What became the coup de grace was I was, for some reason, talking about this with a neighbor who lived in my graduate housing and about the reading. And she's like, I'm into astrology. I was like, oh, cool. Well, maybe I can borrow books because it doesn't make any sense to me. And then on a lark, I asked her, when's your birthday? November 22nd? November 22nd when? Because that's my birthday.
Yeah.
And she's like, November 22nd, 1967, same year. So I was like, this is weird. Like, I happen to run into the same, the person who has the same birthday to the exact date as I do, who's into astrology. Something's at work here. Now, even though I was skeptical of most metaphysics, I could recognize an omen when it was landing on my head. So I felt it was omenic. And I started studying, and I spent 10 years, doing charts, all with the eye on disproving it, it being a house of cards, and then ended up being an astrologer. So it was my most successful failure.
Wow. And something we've touched on in the past before, but you were a child preacher.
Yeah.
So it's not, so you say that the metaphysical world is something you were skeptical of, but there was like the religious background. And I can't remember when you.
Oh, I fell out. So I got out of the ministry. So this is important because people might be confused. I got out of the ministry when I was 19.
Okay.
And, went from the, fundamentalist pipeline to the atheist one. So then I became more of an atheist and looking at things more in terms of race, gender, and class. And when I say atheist, it was more my anger, my own butt hurt related to Christianity and my feelings that I was deceived. I can look at that completely differently now. But, I was in my early 20s and confused and hurt. And then everything became race, gender, and class. So even though like I like tarot, I like numerology.
Yeah.
And I thought those were interesting, as I put it at the time, hermeneutics, ways to kind of evaluate things, but not necessarily something spiritual. So I did embrace that, but astrology doesn't make any sense to me because I was like, how does it work? Why would it work?
And those, I'll get past this, but I'm curious to know, you say it took you 10 years to become an astrologer, right? Like,
or to get to the point where I was ready to become an astrologer. So from 1991 to pretty much 2001, when I started doing certifications.
Okay.
I kind of was doing astrology, even conducted a workshop with someone or people. One of them is now like working for the New York Times, Salamisha Tillett. I used to do astrology with her. But yeah, that's kind of like how I got deeper into it. And then I became an astrologer, decided to be in practice.
That's a slow buildup.
It was because I had other things on my mind and my docket too. I mean, I was an actor. I was a theater artist. So I was living the life of an artist pretty much after I left grad school or dropped out of grad school because I didn't flunk it. I was pretty much kicked out.
Better. Why? Okay, pause. Why were you kicked out of grad school?
Because I wasn't towing the party line for my department, meaning, so my department was the first Afrocentric Africology, African American Studies program in the country. It might still be the only, if memory serves. And I became critical of Afrocentricity and Afrocentric thought. And also in terms of my mentor, the head of the program, and we could say the creator of Afrocentricity, he took a lot of my criticisms personally. My mistake was thinking that academia was really about, the campground of fostering and debating ideas. It's not. It is where, especially when you're in a department, toe the line, totally be committed or appear to be committed to the idea, especially when you're in a PhD program.
Yeah.
And no one likes to feel challenged. Well, I shouldn't say no one, but many, professors have a lot of their egos tied up to their ideas. And he was one of them.
So he cut
off my funding. And so I had to find funding in another department.
Okay.
Through the English department, and then get another teaching assistantship. So I was able to do that for my third year, which would have been, the end of my coursework. So I finished my coursework.
Okay.
Then I would have started writing my dissertation. But then that's when I also realized, like, I didn't want to be in academia.
The actor part is something I never knew, right? Like knew the child preacher, atheist, finding astrology.
Oh yeah, I was a theater artist in Philadelphia and in New York for 10 years.
Is that what brought you to New York?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Can we have a moment on this? So tell me about that work. What were you doing? Like what kind of theater? Was it stage or?
It was stage. It was film. Okay. Yeah. So I was in a couple independent films that never saw the light of day. One, because the director drank himself to death with one film, and the other film, I would love to see the story behind that. It was called Waiting. Yeah, isn't that a film with Ryan Reynolds? Yeah, it was the exact storyline, and I want to know, who pilfered who? And so I was in what I think was the original, and I think that did get made. And I think I had a DVD, but it didn't make it to theaters. But I think once Waiting with Ryan Reynolds came out, it just basically got eclipsed, literally, which is interesting because he's a Scorpio sun too, who married a November 22nder, Scarlett Johansson. I actually have an astro twin, Mark Ruffalo. So it's always funny to see Mark Ruffalo and Scarlett Johansson in the film together. They were, the Hulk and Black Widow. Yeah. So it's always kind of like a private inside joke for me, 21122s. But anyway, yeah, I did mostly theater work on stage. I was a director. I won Pennsylvania Council on the Arts award for a stage play, my first stage play, my only stage play. I won that in Pennsylvania and then moved to New York with the money and was doing theater. I got to do King Lear for the second time with Papa Walton on Off-Broadway. So that was really cool, and met some people who are still out in the acting world. But I didn't like the life of the actor. You have to be ready to drop whatever you're doing to kind of either go out for an audition or be available for a gig or whatever. And it just didn't seem like it was conducive to my life. And that's when I started thinking about more doing astrology. Not even full-time and not even fully to supplement my income, just I don't know. I think I just felt like maybe it could supplement a little bit, but I wasn't thinking about it as my main money maker. Why, were you an actor in New York? Were you?
No, not at all. And I just I just love this. Like I had no idea about that part of your story, and it's so fascinating because you've had a pretty, and even without that chunk of the story, you've had a really dynamic life, right? Just hearing about the child preachers, just all of it. It's fascinating, but that's just that's an interesting chapter.
Yeah, I don't talk about it. I'm also a published poet, so I've been anthologized. So I did live the life of the bohemian artist for a number of years, and you might know about that. You kind of going to art, exhibit openings to get some food.
Yeah.
Parties, all these different things. That was my life for a while. It only changed, as I became more the astrologer dude and left behind tech training, because that's what I started doing on the side between gigs. So I also was a tech trainer trying to bridge the digital divide. And it paid very well in the early, the first, what do they call it? The noughts?
I think so.
Yeah. I mean, in the early days of the transition into the World Wide Web, having some tech experience and, understanding even something as simple as a word processor really helped you a lot.
Wow. Okay. This is so, now I'm really interesting because I'm interesting. I'm very
interesting.
Now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There you go.
Because thinking about, right, the topic of coming back to, the topic of compatibility, right? So you're giving this workshop, you're giving this lecture, and you've done them in the past. You've done. I mean, I think I've definitely listened to lectures on synastry from you before, and so it's interesting thinking about, right? Like, I wonder how much your astrology has been shaped by your time as an actor.
A lot of it. Mm-hmm. When I do a reading, I think of every chart as a script. And so one of the things you learn as an actor to think from the inside out,
okay,
which is what I try to train with my students. Meaning, I often find in astrological texts, and even sometimes as astrologers talk about charts, they will talk about things from the outside in, and usually using some measure, especially in the 20th century, some measure of psych language, saying like this person has a preoccupation, with father figures, or, seeks father figures or whatever. Whereas I think, what do I feel like I need, looking at this chart, and what am I relating to? Like when we say to someone, and I think it is somewhat dismissive, you have daddy issues, right? How does that person experience it? And they're not necessarily experiencing it as I have daddy issues.
Yeah.
As much as, it could be a range of things. It could be a range of where I'm like, I don't know how to set boundaries. I don't know how to deal with the structure. Discipline is difficult for me. So you start making more statements from how the person might be experiencing things, rather than using astrology as like, descriptive diagnostic tool to be able to designate what is wrong with you or what is right with you, which is not how an actor approaches a character. They have to come through empathy. Even if they're a major asshole, some of the best actors will approach this character with an amazing amount of empathy, like trying to understand more what's happening for this person to make the decisions that they make.
You were already, if I'm getting this correct, studying, if not practicing astrology when you went into acting, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that astrology made you a better actor? Like sort of the inverse of that?
I think the inverse is more true, which is, okay, I think acting made me a better astrologer.
Okay.
When I was acting, they kind of, for most of my acting career, lived in different worlds. I didn't necessarily ask my colleagues about their charts until later. Okay. And when I say later, because I got more into theater, I guess shortly after I left grad school, 92, 93. I would say it was when I moved to New York and living there that I started asking more of my colleagues, about their charts. Then especially when I did Shakespeare, and I did it at least a few times, I didn't necessarily concentrate on what is this person's chart, Mm-hmm. I didn't construct that. Now, I know some actors who do that and think that way, but that's not where I landed. It's still not actually where I land. I usually, when I'm watching a show, mm-hmm. I'm paying more attention to the actor's chart than speculating about the character. And the reason why I do that is I've come to believe some measure of our encounter with the character, especially mm-hmm. if it's like, originally done like in a series or something like that, mm-hmm. will manifest through the actor's chart. And you can see with clarity, what kind of things surface. For instance, I'm big into Sherlock Holmes. So Benedict Cumberbatch has a very different Sherlock Holmes than, say, Johnny Lee Miller, who also was playing Sherlock Holmes at a similar time frame. One's a Scorpio Pisces moon, one, and the other is a Cancer, and I'm blanking on Benedict's moon. But they would play it very differently. And so, like, well, Sherlock Holmes must have a chart. On some level, I did find it because I gave a talk at NORWAC called The Astrology of Sherlock Holmes, because I'm, like I said, big into Holmes. And it's very different than, say, like Hugh Laurie, who plays another dimension of the Holmes myth in a character called House. So, right, like literally, that was a play on it. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. Like, House MD was more like a medical procedural inspired by Sherlock Holmes.
I had no clue.
It's okay. Wow. Yeah, that's why his best friend was Wilson instead of Watson. And it was a case, a medical case, which because Arthur Conan Doyle was a doctor and got his idea for Sherlock Holmes from one of his professors, his med school professors.
You talk about like astrology helping us see from the inside, right? Like, like at least with characters, like what's their motivation? Did astrology help you figure out your own motivations? Like to navigate, like was it an important part of navigating the world for you?
It became more confirmation.
Okay.
I had other tools, even during my skeptical atheistic phase, that set the playing field, meaning I went to a Yoruba diviner, a priest, who said very explicitly, and I still have the notes from it, you will be a diviner, which I dismissed at the time. I was just like, oh, okay, sure. And I had other things he would say did make sense, and other things I was like, I wouldn't say didn't make sense as much as like, I don't know how they're really applicable. So by the time I got to the astrologer, then by the time I got deeper into astrology, it helped make sense of dimensions of my life. And what I mean by that, just in the span of what I've said to you, I'm a Pisces rising with a sun in Scorpio with a moon in Leo. I've had a very ninth house life, meaning I was a minister. I was a college professor. I worked for my only full-time job to date was working for a university press, ninth house, right? And now I'm an astrologer. So those are like four things, related to, or at least three or four, related to ninth house life. So it kind of shows how my life has manifested. But I don't know if I looked at astrology and it was like, oh, what is my purpose? Because I didn't come, there's some people who come to astrology who want to better understand themselves.
Yeah.
I kind of was fascinated by astrology itself and was like, what is this? I mean, it was helpful at times in understanding, and other things were not as helpful because some books are very hardcore, and I was just like, that didn't speak to me. Not just some books, but even, some forms of astrology, in less deft hands. But I do think it is a tool to help people who are seeking more understanding. And that's a lot of people who come to me.
Trying not to take too many detours, but I can't help myself. When you had the reading, it was said that you would become a diviner.
Yeah.
Right. And so how do you think, is astrology to you always necessarily divination? Is that your divination practice, or is there something else that he was speaking to?
I think there's a question within your question, if I'm intuiting correctly. Not that isn't a question, but I think there's even more to your question.
Yeah. I'm curious, do you see astrology as divination? Is that your divination practice?
Yes. I do see it as divination. I do see it as magical.
Yeah.
I do see it as cultural. I do see it also spiritual, but I also think spiritual is cultural, cultural is spiritual and ancestral. I think it's demonic, but not demonic. for those who pursue it more as science, I think that's a hard road to go. Not because I think it's impossible or implausible. I just think it's very limited. And I think astrology doesn't perform under the codifications of modern science very well. I think there are, there's one very good book that I've been talking about since I read it. Astrology, the Nature of Astrology by Bruce Schofield, who's trying to make more of this argument. And he also has on the Astrology podcast with Chris Brennan, he talks about how it isn't necessarily just divination or even divination at all, but there might be another set of mechanisms, even, what may appear to become scientific that we haven't discovered yet.
Mm.
I don't dismiss that. I think that could be some measure of truth. But I find more the consistency related to divination and astrologers during the 20th. And I won't go too deep on your dime and time about this, but astrologers during the 20th attempted to distance themselves from divination, other forms of divination like tarot and numerology and runes, kind of like, well, we're better. We're the queen of all those arts and sciences. And I'm like, I don't think so. I think we could make the argument you're the queen, sure, but it's still divination. And a very good book that counters that, and not even counters that, but really addresses that, is The Moment of Astrology by Jeffrey Cornelius, who we lost last year.
Yeah. And it's interesting because astrology can both be a form of divination. When I think of divination, I often think of like question answer, right? You're divining on something, which astrology can do that. But it's interesting thinking about your work, because up until now, we're talking about astrology in very practical terms. So it's interesting to me that it's a divination that can also be very, I want to say human-centered, but it has that sort of practical component to it, right? If we just thinking about the title of your upcoming workshop, how to win friends and influence people using astrology, right? That feels more of like using astrology as maybe a life map.
Yeah, and a tool of understanding, and even drawing in some of the principles, addressed in the book of similar name, right? Yeah. By Dale Carnegie, which I read 2 summers ago because I always resisted it because I was like, it sounds hokey. Mm-hmm. But it is the template for all these self-help books that have come out in the last century. And I think it's a brilliant book, and I'll be tying in some dimensions and thoughts from it, but related to astrology, because you said something interesting, kind of as a it was a foible, but it like, I'm interesting, right? Yeah. But the thing is, one of the things, the principles he teaches, one of the ways to be interesting is to be interested. Mm-hmm. And as much as we on social media, we get really into this first house life, like, look at me, blah, blah, blah. And not really learning more about our 7th house, right? And how to relate through the 7th house and its ruler, for instance. And we think the 7th house is just about relationships and partnerships. It's about also how you connect with others. The moon is too.
Yeah.
And so the more that you're in touch with those dimensions of yourself, your Venus, your Mercury, your moon, the more that you can find ways in which you can be interested by virtue of, with others, and then be interesting and drawing others in. But a lot of people, either they go and just think it's about them. I think that's a mistake that has happened more in our culture. And I think a lot of younger people, younger than us, I know you're younger than I am, but I mean, even younger than, the 2 of us. I don't think they know that. I'll give an illustration. So I am on the committee for NORWAC's Diversity Scholarship, and it's in its 10th year. So it's going to be a special cohort in class. And so we've fielded applications for this pretty much every year for the last 10 years. And the applications, in some permutation, not all of them, obviously, are getting worse. All right. progressively. And when I see like, what do you mean by worse?
Yeah. What do you mean by worse?
When I say worse, you know, initially as people applied, they really expressed not so much more about what the diversity scholarship would mean for them, but what they're trying to do in the community or for the community that NORWAC would help. And so when I say worse, what we're seeing is this mindset, because no one is saying contrary, this mindset, you know, this is what this will do for me. No one cares about you. And so I want to say that aloud to folks. When I say it that way, yeah, I'm using my Saturn. And it's not like I don't care about people. But when you have that level of focus where it's like, well, what are you doing for me? You're missing a point. You are applying for a scholarship. You are applying for a job. So what you have to do is demonstrate what is your value, which I guess some people think is demeaning. And I'm like, it's not demeaning. You're not in the power position. So that's another thing to understand that is addressed in that book as well, and other books, you know, how to win friends and influence people.
Yeah.
It's being aware of where you stand. So astrology is another tool to kind of be aware of yourself in time and space, and even through time and space, meaning that you can look ahead and look at cycles. So you can start timing your life a certain way rather than like, you know, well, I'm like this because I'm a Scorpio. You're like, what? You're a dickhead because you're a Scorpio? I mean, like, is that where you want to be? And what will that do for you? Or, you know, I'll pick on Aries. You know, well, I should be first because, you know, I'm the first sign of the ZODIAC, right? I'm, you know, don't you know how wonderful I am? No, that's why your job is to kind of let people know.
I started re-listening to that book on Audible in preparation for this interview. And I was thinking about, right, he starts off with that very premise, right? Like, if you want to influence other people, you have to figure out what they want, right? Essentially. And so how you get them to believe that you can give them what they want, right? And, you know, my first like spacey thoughts are like, oh, is like Sam going around like looking at everybody's like, or are we supposed to be like looking at everybody's astrology charts, which isn't always practical, right? But when you said something about, right, like seeing the world through your seventh house, and it made me think that even my idea of like understanding an astrology chart, right? Some people come to an astrology because they want to know more about themselves. Ooh, like so many readings, just tell me about me. Or friends that, you know, learn I'm an astrologer, and the first thing they say is, tell me about me. And that's great. But I think maybe what you're getting at is there's a way to like look in our own charts and see other people. Like we don't even need their chart necessarily.
And that was the classical way. Your chart wasn't always just about you. Mm-hmm. You know, it could be about your partnerships. It could be about your children. I have looked at people's charts and talked to them about their children because I can look at their fifth house. I can talk about their partners. You can figure out which parent is fourth or 10th, right? And talk about the relationship they had with them and get insight. So, or 11th related to, you know, general friends or acquaintances as versus like people you consider like siblings, third house, or who are your siblings. And so it became a way of being able to reflect. Like I'm going to talk about just in about 2 weeks, I'm going to give a lecture on enemies. And they're, you know, even in a chart in traditional astrology, there's two types of enemies. The enemies you can't see, 12th house, and the enemies you can see, 7th house. And so what becomes your relationship with your enemies? And what constitutes an enemy? How do you create an enemy? Because I think that's also not acknowledged. Like there are ways in which people create enemies and they don't even realize that they're creating enemies. So it's a tool for more self-awareness, but it's an awareness that can come not only for the self, but, you know, by virtue of like a work as an actor, others. And that is the work, going back to your original question. Yeah. What acting taught me is that the palette of your emotions conditioned by your experiences become the palette you use to create the character. that you embody or you're hired to do. And it's not going to be you. Some of the best actors have pieces of themselves infused into a character. They may even have pieces of themselves that haven't even lived out, but they live in their minds, and that's what makes them good actors. You know, there are some actors who, like one of my favorite actors. You know, Bryan Cranston is also a great actor, favorite of mine. It's interesting that, you know, either Pisces or Capricorns, and Anthony Hopkins is another favorite, and I can probably list more.
Yeah.
But the thing I enjoy about Anthony Hopkins, you know, considering he's had such a long career, is that he's been pretty straight-laced, you know, as far as his life. Like, I can't think of any big scandals he's had in his life. But he's played some pretty scandalous characters, and I think it's because there's unlived parts of himself and maybe other things, maybe from his inner life, that he draws on. And so I think that's where we need to entertain. And the way we get to that is thinking about and processing our experiences, reflecting on them, and not just relying on keywords. You know, I don't allow my students initially to kind of use the word transformation with Pluto, because it's one of those keywords, as an example, that hides a lot. Like, and I'm an asshole sometimes with them. I'm saying, the fuck are you talking about? You know, am I going to become a bug? You know, I'm going to fly away. Like, when you say, like, well, you're going to have a transformative experience. What kind of transformative experience, Suzanne? Like, what are you talking about here? And they have to work. You know, it's going to be a catalyst for maybe some cathartic release that you're dealing with. Okay, that's a little better. You're talking about something that's human, that someone can experience and work with and kind of step into. But saying like, well, I think it could be like, you know, your Pluto in your eighth means you have transformative experiences. Chick, like what? Like who? So anyway, I think you want to ask me something or say something. I know we're going toward our time frame.
No, I'm just laughing at you yelling at your students.
It's always with love, but you know, I hope they feel that way. They might be like, he's just mean. His Jupiter and Virgo is so goddamn loud.
Maybe we can end this on coming back to, you know, we call it synastry or astrology, having to do with compatibility. How did that become an interest of yours? And for those who don't know what we're talking about, how can they use astrology to better connect with the people in their lives? So two-part question there.
So I'm going to start with the second part of it, which I think is juicy, to better connect.
Yeah.
I think the better translation for synastry, other than the literal translation, is the combination of two charts, is how to better connect. Because a lot of people think combining and looking at charts just works on its own, and it does not. And that is the one bubble I would love to pop first, because you have to take into account life itself, and that means age, orientation. You could have the chart of a 75-year-old with a 2-year-old puppy. Okay, you're like, oh, they're great, and I think they would make a great relationship. Yeah, between an owner and her dog. Let's keep it real, as versus like, you know, or we could think about in terms of sexual orientation.
Yeah.
If someone is avowedly homosexual, they may not be drawn to someone who's avowedly heterosexual, even though they may become good friends. So even like the synastry is just fire. Yeah, but it may not translate into fire that way. So you have to take into account the nature of life itself and stages of life, ages of life. So I think that's the first thing. So you want to look at compatibility to better understand yourself in relationship, better understand your partner, and better understand the relationship itself. And I think that's the spirit in which to go with it, rather than thinking like, well, you know, because I have a friend who doesn't allow some friends to meet like his romantic interest because he's afraid that there could be a romantic conflagration between them. Like, oh, and then he's just left in the lurch. Now, to be fair to him, it has happened to him, one. And then two, yes, he may be insecure in that particular way. So that is, both are true. But I don't think it works just by that level of magic, you know? So that's one key thing I would say. So we're looking at, you know, for this workshop and lecture, we're really thinking about how do you better understand yourself related to what you might need and can benefit from and work with in relationship. Getting beyond like, you know, you're an Aries, I'm a Scorpio, maybe we can make it. And it's like, well, maybe not. Or maybe so, because of other factors, right? How did I get into it? Synastry wasn't really as fascinating for me. I would say natal astrology is always and is still very fascinating to me. Horary probably would rank second as an interest of mine. And then astrocartography really has become more my jam in recent times. And then I would say probably synastry. And synastry became more of a topic mainly because of my clients. They kept coming back to me. You know, and you're like, well, didn't you look at synastry related to partners? Sort of. So obviously, like, didn't you look at your synastry with Jessica? Sure, I did. I mean, whenever I see someone's chart, anyone's chart, I'm not thinking always romantic synastry. With clients, I might think like, why am I their astrologer? And it usually becomes evident very quickly because that's also another kind of synastry. Because we can talk about synastry between parents, synastry between boss and employee, between employees, between friends, all kinds of roommates. We could look at synastry in so many different levels. So I started getting more people requesting that, and I was reading more about it and became fascinated with its workings. But I also had to think through, like, what, you know, true to my skeptical roots, what might not be true about it. And what might not be true, again, is just like this magical thinking, like, oh, these two charts. Like, for instance, I've heard clients say, like, his Mars is really trying to my moon. And, you know, that's really a connection. And I'm like, well, if he doesn't have like a skilled Mars or he hasn't worked with his Mars, it just might make it easier for him to be violent. That, you know, don't romanticize the trine.
I think also, do you find that there can be a danger, like, and I've totally been guilty of this, right? You meet someone, you have like a crush on them, you know their chart, and then you can like fall for their chart and you like it, you disassociate. That to feels like one of the sort of dangers of all of this.
Yeah, and it also can go the negative way. You know, like you look at their Mercury-Neptune conjunction, you go like, oh, they're a liar. And you meet them and, you know, it turns out they're a poet, they're a screenwriter. You're like, well, I'm still lying. I mean, it's not the same.
Yeah.
We also don't know what work someone has done, you know, from their chart. Like, yeah, probably, I lied a lot when I was a kid. I'm not talking about myself, but you could be looking at that Mercury-Neptune person who says like, yeah, I lied a lot as a kid. And then something bad happened when I was 16 about it. And that, you know, Saturn maybe opposing their Mercury or whatever, and they got out of it. So you can't attest for what work has been done, what therapy, what has been outgrown. You only have baseline signatures for what a person might be working with and has worked somewhat through for various reasons.
With your own clients, or in the past, and just in general, I should say, I don't want to get into your client practice, but do you really push people to look into their own natal chart before they look at like synastry with someone else, right? To understand themselves in a relationship before, or is there any line for you?
I weave that in, but I do what I'm commissioned to do or have been paid to do. Because generally the client doesn't want to hear, the average client doesn't want to hear like, look at yourself. Fuck you. I paid you X number of dollars to be able to tell me about whether this person is a good partner. And so I have to kind of this may trigger this for you. And so
Okay.
you might have to reflect on what that trigger is. So that means, yeah, look at yourself. But I'm not going to disavow or negate that there could be a trigger. Also, this might work very well in terms of this connection. You guys talk, and I ask questions. Do you guys talk a lot? Like say, they have kissing Mercuries, right? You talk a lot, feel a connection. But let's say that Mercury has a square, someone else's Neptune. Well, you might have to clarify, ask questions. Did you mean 6 o'clock today or tomorrow? Press for clarity when you don't, rather than assuming. So, there's different ways in which I will talk about what's practical.
Yeah.
Related to like how they can start to process for themselves as well.
Final question. And it's a
doozy.
It's a doozy. Yeah, no, and it's a sort of an easy one, right? I mean, that's the word. Flippant's not the word, but okay. Just off the top of your head, if you had to think of like 1 to 2 of your favorite signatures in synastry for a good relationship, like could you just share them? Like I know nothing comes down to 1 or 2 points, but something that you're like, oh, I really like seeing this in the chart between 2 people.
Kissing moons in the same sign.
Okay.
It usually gives a solid understanding and perhaps even a compassion for the other. And then I do something I call the golden square, meaning I like Mars-Venus contacts between folks because it does give a certain animal magnetism, which I think is good. Not that every relationship will have this, needs to have this, but I do like to see it because a lot of people think with synastry, you want someone who is like you, or you want someone, where you have lots of trines and you have lots of, sextiles and, just a small smattering of squares or whatever. But really, you want a small diet of squares and oppositions. But yes, you do want some of the more positive ones. But the Mars-Venus keeps the charge, makes it sexy. Because what can happen if someone is too like you, irrespective of your sexual orientation, is bed death. You end up roommates. And I lost you. Come back, Vivi. I say bed death, and then bed knobs and broomsticks. Vivi went away. I wonder if we're still recording. Do 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 do. I think we are still recording, so this is going to be on the recording.
Oh my God, are you still there?
Yes, I am. Yeah, you're going to have fun.
Oh my God, the last thing you said was bed death, and my.
Don't say the word. The word must be jinx.
My computer died at bed death. I was hoping I could get through it. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. No, I made a lot of funny sounds and I entertained myself.
I love it.
But it was, it was funny. But yeah, bed death can happen, if you don't have those sparks. So those would be my 2 favorites. I do want to see Mars, Venus. One great example of that was between Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt.
Okay.
Very quick story. I'm not really as on top of, gossip and what happens with celebrities. And that's been true a long time. So when there were rumors that Brad Pitt had started an affair with Angelina Jolie during the filming of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I really didn't care. I didn't watch Friends, so I wasn't really partial to Jennifer Aniston. I was like, okay, nice blonde couple. It's exciting. It didn't matter to me. But I did like the genre, in terms of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And so I went to see the film because I had recently become a Brad Pitt fan, thanks to Troy, because I wasn't really a fan before that. But Troy, I was like, he could have really botched that role. And I think he did a really great job as an actor playing Achilles. Like, I thought he brought him to life. So I was like, okay, let's see it. While I was watching the film, Vivi, I was like, oh, being an actor, I was like, oh, they're fucking. That was real. Like, you could just see it. And then I looked at their charts, and then you could see the squares that they have between their Mars and Venus and Venus. And the problem is that they have a lot of squares and a lot of oppositions. So too many really can create a challenge, which I just want to say to folks who are, who know enough astrology to be dangerous.
Yeah.
A challenge doesn't mean, give up. It just may mean like you're going to have to be sensitive and patient and attentive. And it sounds like they really had trouble with that. And so they didn't stay together, but they did have that. I'm going to be, on your bones.
I've had that happen before. Like you see two people and you're like, they're together. You're like, oh, that's, yeah.
Yeah. That they have that energy.
Okay. So kissing moons, very sweet. And then a little more dynamic, we have the Mars Venus.
Yeah. Either Venus to Venus, Venus to Mars, either way. And just for clarity, when I say kissing moons, conjoining moons. Within, number of degrees, people always ask, well, what's your orbs? I mean, like up to 5, but, even if it's like Kim Kardashian and Kanye had kissing moons, they're both, we can believe, moons in Pisces. And they stayed together longer than most thought because I think they could speak through their moons in Pisces. And
go ahead.
Yeah. And one thing that touched me is even when Kanye in 2016 was going through his worst, and saying all kinds of ish on social media, Kim defended him. Not defended necessarily what he was saying, but like, listen, y'all, he's sick. And, I think she still cares for him deeply. So I think those moons, that moon really does still keep a level of connection. Like my ex-wife and I had kissing moons. We still are in each other's lives. It's fairly amicable. What were you going to say?
No, just thinking about the two, like what you said, that even though people can have really intense or synastry that pulls them together, it doesn't always equal a good relationship, right? Like you can be, and I think this is important to remember because, we've all had those people where they're like, but they feel like my twin flame or something. And you're like, it's okay. Like you can feel compelled to this person or attracted, but like there may be issues in both of your life circumstances that make it a very unhealthy relationship beyond the synastry. And I think maybe that's important to remember too.
I'm glad you said that because some people can get caught up in that narrative, whether it's true or not, whether it's twin flames or whether it's your soulmate, and think like, well, because I've had people call me like, well, I think they're my soulmate. That doesn't mean that you have to suffer with them. It also doesn't mean that they're ready, especially if you believe in reincarnation or something like that, that they're ready to kind of have this life with you. I had this client once when I was working for a phone service call me and say, like, my fiance has gone back to his ex-girlfriend 7 times. And I just want to know, is he coming back to me? And I said to her, because, I have a little patience. I'm not trying to keep people on the phone or trap people on the phone to make money. I just said to her, I think you're asking the wrong question. And she got mad and hung up. But I still would stand by that. Like, why are you with someone who's left you 7 times? You got to look at yourself at that point. Is it for this narrative? Like, well, they're my soulmate. So
I don't know. I feel like your soulmate's probably not going to harm you in those ways.
If they really care. So, but, I don't pretend to understand everyone's meta narrative. I'm still skeptical of certain metaphysics.
Same. I've taken you over. This has been so lovely. Thank you for giving me this time. And you are coming to Los Angeles at the end of April for the LA Astro Fest. You're going to be giving a lecture and a workshop.
Yeah, with some of my favorite people. So, I mean, Diana Rose Harper is going to be there, and Lindsay Turner is going to be there, and Jonah Emerson Bell. So yeah, and also is Lars going to be there? No, I don't think Lars.
Lars is going to be there in some capacity.
Okay.
So I unfortunately I met Lars after we put the roster together, but I wanted to do a workshop with Lars before that. Lars is fantastic. Wonderful horoscope writer for those listening. And then I also want to sit down and talk to you and Lindsay about your backgrounds as preachers.
Yeah.
And I love their work so much. And I forget the two of you have that in common.
Yeah. They're still a preacher. So I'm
yeah. Okay. I'm really excited. And so tell me also, how can people find you? And also the, you said in a couple of weeks, you're giving a, is it a lecture on enemies? And is that public?
It is public. You can sign up for it. It's the Washington. Okay. I'll get the official title because, that becomes important. The Washington Astrological Associate, the Washington State Astrological Association, also known as WASA. So that's March. So I'm giving a lecture. The lecture is March 13th, and then just before the eclipse. And then on the 15th is a workshop I'm giving on the lunar mansions.
Okay. Will you email links to both of those, and I'll share them in the show notes so people can check those out and then get their tickets and come to Los Angeles to see you in person.
Okay. And I'll also forward. Yeah, I'll send that to you. Okay.
And then how else? Unlockastrology.com. What are the best ways for people to keep in touch with you?
Unlockastrology@gmail.com is one of the easiest ways to write me, but you also can book the session from my website directly, and we'll take it from there.
Fantastic. Have a gorgeous day.
You too.
Thank you.
There are no parents, no other adults, no one to interfere with the fun.